FinTechTalk, the live webinar with no presentations, no PowerPoint, just talk.
Today, we're looking at transforming your anti-money laundering processes. Now, AML is not one of the sexiest topics in the industry, but it is a huge one, and we've seen some whacking great fines dealt out recently. To get to the heart of this, we have recruited two world experts in the subject of AML, and we're going to be looking at some of the most challenging issues the industry has to offer. So let me introduce my first panelist. Denitsa Rebane is an experienced professional of about 2 decades standing. Denitsa, she is the founder of the well-known Compliance Time podcast, which is it the #1 podcast in the world on compliance? I think it must be. Let me fill in for a second, because we're going to go to a news item when Denitsa and our other guest, Elena, joins. We're having severe technical difficulties, but the news article is worth flashing up. It's new figures issued by the analytics company Corelytics, looking at the sheer size of the AML problem. And I think these numbers are just staggering. Global enforcement fines increased to 5.65 billion in Q3 this year. That's up 30% since the start of the year. There are some absolutely immense numbers being handed out. The SEC stung Deutsche Bank with $25 million penalty. That was for ESG misstatements, anti-money laundering violations, and a quite phenomenal $250 million charged by the SEC to 11 Wall Street firms for off-channel communications. So lack of compliance, people using WhatsApp, staggeringly unprofessional behavior, hit with $250 million fine. These are huge numbers. Denitsa is back. Denitsa, do we have you?
Let's hope so. Can you hear me now?
Denitsa, we can. Fantastic. Lovely to have you with us. We have another guest as well.
Thank you so much.
Denitsa, let us plow on the two of us, because there's more than enough for us to talk about. Let's just put this into context. I just read out some whacking great fines, 5.65 billion in 1 quarter. So if you think AML practitioners not being paid enough, well, look at the fines being issued for non-compliance. Just sum up the industry for us, because people outside the industry may assume, well, AML, it's not that dramatic. People ought to have a grip on it. Evidently not. How do you see it?
I see AML as part of the overall financial crime compliance, playing a very crucial role in the global industry. Traditionally, if it was more back to the United States, BSA, we see more and more pressure from EU institutions as well. We have AML Directive 5 and 6 imposing new and new requirements. We see the EU is also going towards enforcement, as there are new cases. For example, the one of BNP Paribas is one of the largest fine imposed by EU regulators of 15 million euros on AML deficiencies were that happened between 2014 and 2019. AML will remain on focus, and I think it's a global issue that more and more, not only financial institutions but other players are looking at, as scams and money laundering happens also outside the financial institutions. We know that there is a trade-based money laundering where the trade components are involved, and I think that's broadly saying some of the highlights that I would like to mention.
What does this say, though? These fines are so big. That suggests incompetence on a pretty wide scale. Is that unfair?
I think the regulators are determining the fines based on the egregiousness. If the bank or financial institution or an actor was really trying to sweep things under the rug and not taking necessary steps to address key risks. We know, and there are multiple sources that talk about red flags, typologies, there are legislations and abundance of literature. So I think the severity of the fines is because of the egregious and the ignorance that some of the institutions have displayed.
Okay. Now, give us an indication as to how the industry is going. Now, we've heard of a shift from a rule-based approach to a behavioral approach. What is meant by that?
The shift I think has not yet happened, but I heard recently that a large player like Google is entering into the alert space, and they have conducted a very interesting trial with HSBC, I believe, that really addressed the different way of transaction monitoring that's behavioral based versus rule based. To the best of my recollection, this was shared with the regulator, but I think, as with sanctions, the false positives and chasing legitimate behavior within the transaction monitoring systems was always a problem. That's why this behavioral approach is so interesting, because it really shifts the need, the types of reviews, the types of patterns that are going to be analyzed. And thanks to artificial intelligence, you can now look at vast data sets much faster, more dynamic assessments can be done. But of course, there are some challenges regarding the data sets. Clearly, also the behavioral approach may require more skilled personnel to actually be involved in the alert reviews. So it's really interesting how it would evolve. But when you hear that giants like Google are looking into it and how to deploy AI into the transaction monitoring space, I think it's something to really look at and follow for the future.
Cool. It's going to be massive. But Denitsa, just continue with that, please, because when it comes to implementation of AML, people talk about the challenges, whether it's quality of data, whether it's different tools people are using, whether it's even getting hold of enough things like AI experts. In your opinion, where are the bottlenecks? Where do things go wrong?
That's a great question. I would say data has always been a challenge since I remember the industry, because especially large financial institutions have traditionally systems that are maybe older, maybe some legacy systems are in place, and it's quite challenging to consolidate the data, to shape it in a form that's good for any kind of technological development. And that's typically where the bottleneck is in terms of data, I believe. Now, next is the silos that people operate in. It's not enough to have good transaction monitoring if you have a bad KYC or know your customer.
And just tell me about just your view of whether this stuff is effective, because the fines are very big. Criminal organizations do seem to be able to process vast sums of money. I mean, in the south of Italy, 'Ndrangheta just had about 200 people sentenced to a tremendous amount of time in jail. And their turnover is, I don't know, $50 to $60 billion a year. The figures are unreliable. But the financial system does seem to be porous. In your opinion, how effective is all this AML stuff? Is it bureaucracy, the compliant, and paperwork for the honest people, and a sieve for the criminal organizations?
You're asking $1 billion questions today, Charles. Is AML effective? Well, yes and no. Yes, because if we didn't have these rules and trying to put the bar and the controls against these people, I think it would be even easier for them to launder money. I think AML programs are designed in such way that they are really limiting a lot of activity that before maybe several years back would go undetected. However, there are multiple flaws with and there are books and probably a body of literature talking about the paradoxes, paradigms around money laundering, and speaking about the disparities between the controls that different jurisdictions have. And even though we have international bodies like the FATF, Wolfsburg Group, there are still jurisdictions where you can go and deposit a bag of cash. Maybe now it will be now it will be more difficult, but as long as there are these secrecy havens that
Yeah.
allow type of avoidance of the rules and laws, enablers are enabling money launderers without a problem, well, the problem will persist. And I see more the role of of an AML analyst and as a person who uh, is working with AML in trying to detect and prevent all this that is happening, and always keep in mind what other control, how they can really focus and have a better understanding on the systems, on their procedures, on some of the new methodologies coming out, and try to deter this negative
Yeah.
activity. Because with sanctions it's a bit more easier, maybe, in terms of you see the sanctioned party, you know that you have to stop that transaction, that activity, that client. But with AML, a lot of time is coming down to difficult decisions, into having suspicions but not really confirmed knowledge of the illicit activity, because you see several numbers, yeah, a few large wires or few large amounts sitting on an account. Is it necessarily bad? Did this person or an entity actually have this money legitimately or not? You
Yeah.
know, it's a tough industry, I think, because you have to work based on suspicions. It's almost never a confirmed a confirmed thing that you're looking at.
I'm interested in again these difficulties. In particular, let's look at something like AML and sanctions and how they work together. Sanctions have been politically seen as highly important. Different sanctions against Russia, are they effective? So how do these two work together, AML and sanctions?
Yeah, so I think nowadays, AML and sanctions would have to work even better together, because of the importance that regulators are starting to place on sanctions evasion and export controls, especially as you mentioned with Russia and the Russian sanctions, the depth and the complexities of Russian sanctions. We are now notified by various enforcement agencies about potential threats of avoidance, actually evasion, sorry, sanctions evasion, to get my terms straight, right? So sanctions evasion is not something that you can just screen your way through. You need partnership with other places around the bank or financial institution, or services providers that can help you um, review and analyze patterns, questionable behavior, something that may be indicative of evasion, and something that can be indicative of sanctioned parties involved. And
Great. Well, let's just plunge in. And we won't waste any time. I mean, one big issue that gets asked again and again is the skill sets companies need to combat AML. Lawyers, economists, data scientists. Just give us an overview of all the different skills needed and whether there are enough people able to do these jobs, because it looks like there's a massive shortage.
Yes, I think it's very important actually, because in the end, even though you have all the data which is of good quality, all the tools that may be necessary for smoothing the process and detecting suspicious activity, if you don't have the right people with the right skill set, it's very complicated to have efficient AML controls. So I think that there's a big shift in the market towards data analytics, toward IT skills actually, which are all necessary now in AML. Not only to be able to adjust, the systems to the typologies, but also on a daily basis. Like it's more and more technical skill than some legal or rather economics, analytics skills as it used to be before, in my opinion. And the talent is it's complicated to find like a perfect set of skills in one person. Normally, it's a team.
Just tell me about the reputation of AML, because there's voracious talent. War for talent. The big tech companies want to hire the best, AI, ML experts. What sort of person ends up working in AML? When it comes to really cutting edge tech skills, is it easy to persuade them?
I think that right now we're on the way. Like a lot of people in the profession, they understand that it's been changed, and people try to educate themselves. They enroll to the courses and they try to master these IT skills and technical skills. But I think that it could be a combination of both. Like those specialists that are already on the market, they can, of course, get another type of education or another type of training. And also IT specialists, I see a lot of them switch into AML, which is great as well, and which is with the help of fintech industry is also happening.
Amazing. Can I just ask you about the way AML is maybe siloed or not? Now, some people might think it's just one discipline within a bank or a financial organization, but there's an increasing view that, in actual fact, it's the responsibility of the whole organization. What do you make of that, Elena? I mean, has AML transformation started to affect every part of the company?
I think it's really important for the whole bank to understand the importance of AML, because in the end, it is impacting everyone. It has been related more and more, as you were saying before, with sanctions, with anti-corruption. So such kind of risks and such kind of typologies, they can be detected and seen in almost every department, starting from human resources, from hiring people, to operations, front office, cost department, and of course, senior management. Everybody should be aware of such risks, and not only risk, also about the importance of the function and dependencies. Like we depend heavily on IT, we depend heavily on human resources for them to hire right specialists to do the hunting, to do the searches. So it's really important for the whole organization to have the AML culture and to have the AML awareness for the daily function.
So I can see you nodding away while she's talking. I mean, do you feel that AML is adequately understood by financial organizations in the broadest sense? I mean, do people go on little courses and claim to tick the box? But do you feel that in banks that people really understand what's expected of them across an organization?
From my experience, honestly, Charles, I think yes. I mean, it is understood. There are issues in many institutions. We can see, as you mentioned, the enforcement actions. But I think AML is understood, and there is a lot of resources, a lot of initiatives that are now going on in terms of improving if there are any kinds of gaps or anything identified. But overall, I think that institutions are trying. It's not an easy job, but from my experience, I think it's understood. I'll pass on to Len also to respond maybe from her view.
I would agree. I think that it's a combination. Like, yes, training is good, but I think right now more and more financial institutions and also regulators, they expect the financial institutions to implement such kind of systems when the compliance performance of the whole bank, and especially the front office, the bankers, is impacted. If there is anything that is not being met, that is not in compliance with what is expected from the banker as a first line of defense, normally the regulators and as a consequence, the management in the bank, they have a system in place that would impact the bonus or the rating of the banker. So I think this is a part that is also adding maybe not in a very nice way, but it's adding efficiency and awareness. It's pushing the first line of defense, the front office, to understand the importance of compliance. But there has to be a dialogue as well. Okay. Impacting the bonus is a good instrument, but I think that there has to be a dialogue as well.
And can I also ask you about what people actually spend their time doing? Because the news article I introduced this segment with, which talks about fines, had a lovely and rather remarkable statistic in it. In regulatory monitoring, teams spend 75% of their time reading irrelevant regulatory updates. I'm not sure I can believe this. As the survey says, this is 70% of the time that could be spent on value-add tasks. So tell me this is not true. People are spending 3/4 of their time reading irrelevant regulatory updates.
How can the regulatory update be deemed irrelevant? Oh, that doesn't make sense. I mean, that was so funny. I mean, no, as long as the speed with the regulatory updates they're coming, especially for example in the sanction space recently, but the speed is tremendous. But I cannot say that that's time wasted. No.
Is it ever time wasted? No. Okay, but how much time do you actually spend reading regulatory updates? I mean, the rule book is enormous, never changing. I mean, it's a pain. But 75. You don't spend 75% of your time reading regulations, do you?
Not really. I wouldn't say I spend so much time on reading regulations, although my job is around regulatory compliance. But there are lots of other things during the day that may occur. I think regulations are crucial to be read, and there is a vast majority of them, but that's not well spent, because if you spend these 70, if your job is about analyzing and breaking down this regulation and maybe presenting it to others in your organization or making sure that you're compliant, then this is time well spent, and then you're doing your job well, or making sure others are doing their job well. So I think yeah, maybe if I wouldn't say it's redundant. It's an important task, and it should be done in an efficient way, and it should produce something out of it. Maybe that's where people are struggling, that they spend time reading without actually simplifying it for the future.
Elena, just give us an insight. What do you and your team actually spend your time doing? Don't tell me you spend 3/4 of your time reading regulatory updates.
We actually have a special team for this. We have a regulatory team dedicated to monitoring regulations and ensuring that we comply with them. So they filter this information to us. They issue a regular regulatory radar that is sent to the whole bank. So I think that it's not 75 or 70% of the time for sure. But in addition to that, we do read some news and updates related to sanctions, related to AML, maybe not the changes in the regulation, but on a weekly basis, there is always something. So some part of it, at least 10%, I think, yes.
Okay. And just to finish with, I thought the most interesting theme, Denitsa, was your idea that the vulnerabilities are coming through jurisdictions and organizations that are not yet up to speed. That although some organizations, and certainly the companies you work for, take AML and sanctions seriously, this is not globally recognized. And once the money has entered the system, it sort of gets laundered by semi-reputable organizations. Now, for people who've watched money pouring out of Russia, you see the Russian economy has not been affected by sanctions in the way that we hoped. Far from it. Other countries that have been sanctioned, Venezuela, for example, we certainly saw the money that Maduro and Chavez had filched ending up in banks all over the world. It shouldn't be happening, yet it is. So, Lisa, can you just tell us, from your position of expertise, I mean, is this right? I mean, you say it's harder for money to be laundered if the best organizations do it well. But just how serious are these glitches within the financial system, having jurisdictions that are weak and not up to speed?
Now, we should remember that we are always against people who are seeking for opportunities, for small loopholes, for vulnerabilities, and trying to exploit that. So the overall, financial industry has lots of loopholes that are utilized. You have seen various scams, cryptocurrencies being utilized to move money and hide their origins sometimes, and sometimes offshore locations, enablers of a kind. It's not that complicated to set up a shell company. We can see with all of the disclosures around the Panama Papers, FinCEN files, what was that? Paradise Papers. Now, recently, there is another, such leak around Cyprus, which was also traditionally a sort of offshore jurisdiction. So, as long as this exists and they can successfully mask the actual criminal origins of the asset, of the money, well, yeah, that would happen. We know arts are being used and exploited for money laundering. We know luxury items such as real estate, vehicles, watches, jewelry. Many of these items, well, may not raise as many flags depending on how it's bought. Nobody will report the purchase of 10 handbags from Hermes or somewhere else, to the regulator. But that might have been a suspiciously large transaction for someone. So yeah, there are lots of interesting things around AML and how it can be deterred. But certainly, as I mentioned, we are up against people who seek each and meticulously spend significant time looking through regulations and loopholes and how to, mitigate those. So I think we should spend the same time trying to make sure that the controls that we have in place are sufficient to stop them and, not allow them to do that activity with our financial institution, wherever we work, because there is also a globality in the legislation piece that we cannot address as, an employee of a certain financial institution or a citizen of the world. So yeah, there should be put pressures
so that's a question
on
for
these
you.
non-compliant.
Of course, currently the British Library is shut down because of ransomware. The ransom is something like, I don't know, $600,000, which is supposed to be payable in Bitcoin. Now, clearly, the ransom people have confidence that they can turn Bitcoin into dollars and spend those dollars. I mean, if you had a challenge, if I set you a challenge, Denitsa, of laundering $600,000, how hard in Bitcoin, how hard would you find it to turn that into cash in your bank account?
I'm not so experienced with Bitcoins, but and from what I know is that there is a better chance to be captured if you're using Bitcoin. So if I was a criminal, I wouldn't want to use a lot of Bitcoin. But as we know, there are mixers, there are other things that can be used on the blockchain that can even help you. Privacy coins, sorry, not other things, private coins that can help you hide yourself. And there are exchanges that work with those privacy coins. So again, you can use various techniques which probably were not intended for money laundering, but they're out there to help you launder your crypto money. And later on, will come through some financial institution, probably not located in a Western jurisdiction, where you will have your money, so you can get them out. Either they will come to a company account or to an individual account, more likely for the ransomware, I believe it should be an individual account. But yeah, and from there on, you are free to start moving them around in the shape, way, or form that you can get your hands around, setting up fake companies, other bank accounts, taking them out in cash, making ATM transactions,
So
purchasing something
Vanessa,
expensive.
you sound pretty confident. You don't sound like it would be a challenge for you, a mere 600,000.
Well, let's make a test. Give me the money and let's try.
Well, it doesn't. Elena, I know this is a cheeky question, but what do you think? Where would you start sweating if you had 10 million to launder? And let's bear in mind, if you're a sanctioned Russian oligarch or you're a Mexican drug cartel, the figures are going to be way more than $10 million. Elena, do you feel confident you could turn $10 million into legitimate money?
Yeah, I would use trade finance. In comparison to AML and sanctions, I think that there is a much less transparency in trade finance. There is no cooperation between authorities. You can issue multiple contracts, have invoices. So it's untraceable, really, because there is no cooperation internationally. So I would use trade-based money laundering.
At what scale, though? Trade finance. I mean, if you up to $10 million, you think you could do a deal that size and not get flagged?
I mean, I don't know, but I think it's possible. Just maybe diversifying businesses, not using just one contract and one invoice, but multiple businesses, multiple banks, multiple contracts.
So just to end, I mean, Denitsa, it sounds as if those fines that were handed out are quite reasonable, that this is such a complicated field that keeping up with regulatory updates is highly time-consuming. I mean, just to conclude, what does it say about the AML industry that people at the SEC need to issue such massive fines? I mean, was it $5.65 billion globally in one quarter in fines? It's not just for AML, I mean, it's compliance disorders, but AML leads the list. So what does that say about the industry?
That there is a huge future around compliance. There will be more resourcing needing. There will be more policies, procedures, governance, and the tone from the top is going to change. I think purposefully the regulators are pushing and are penalizing some of the actors in the industry that have failures in the systems or failures with some of their compliance obligations. And yeah, I think this will be a growing industry, and there will be a lot of needs of new people, new technology, new processes coming around.
Good news. And Elena, your verdict, what do these fines say about the AML industry?
I think that it's a lot of pressure. Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Yes, go ahead.
No, I was saying that it demonstrates the pressure we have from the regulators, the financial institutions from the regulators. It demonstrates the expectations that are higher and higher every year, such kind of fines. And it also may be a message to the criminals that every time there are consequences for the banks and for financial institutions, so that are not very, so that they are more vigilant in this sense. So I think it's a double message, both for the banks and for the criminals.
Well, evidently AML is going to be a good place to work. We're agreed on that. Denitsa, Elena, thank you so much for your time. A bit of a glitchy episode, but we got through it. I think some really powerful points were made. The importance of investing in this, otherwise massive fines will be levied. And please join us next week. We'll be discussing Know Your Customer. We have 3 global experts discussing the very latest in KYC, an issue that affects every financial organization. So same time next week. But for today, Denitsa, Elena, thank you so much and goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank
Goodbye.
you. Bye-bye.